Hello good people of YouTube and welcome to my hobby channel, and this video, which was supposed to be an unboxing of the Saga Age of Crusades Saracen 4-point starter warband with a view to looking at how you could take that warband and turn it into a proxy Araby army. But halfway through filming this video, everything took an unexpected turn. If I'm honest, I was ready to abandon this project and delete this video, but since I put so much work into filming it, by the time things started to go wrong, I thought I may as well upload the video anyway, because hopefully what you see in this video will still be of use to you and will still be helpful if you are thinking of purchasing a Saracen warband yourself. Hello good people of YouTube and welcome to my hobby channel. In a recent trip to my friendly local gaming store, I was looking to pick up some cavalry or some mounted units that I could use for a proxy Araby army. Now, I haven't actually played Saga, although I do have the rules. I haven't decided if I want to use these in Saga yet or not, but I have decided that they would make a pretty good proxy for an Araby army. First of all, we've got bases, and these are fairly standard 25mm round, a couple of spare cavalry bases, and 3 strips of cavalry bases, 2 sprues of warriors on foot that allow you to make 10 miniatures, 6 sprues, each containing 3 horses, legs for 3 riders, and 6 torsos. 3 6s are 18, so there are enough models here to make you 2 units of 8 with 2 miniatures left over, one of whom will become your warlord. So let's take a quick look at the sprue with the horses and the riders on. And I really do love these horses. I love those poses. And we've got numbered on the inside 1, 2, 3, which suggests that maybe they're not interchangeable. Next thing I want to do is look at the heads. Now, I've already noticed that there are only 2 heads here that fill that Araby aesthetic that I'm after. So obviously if I was building a Saga warband straight from the box, I'd be picking these heads, but I want to lean into that Araby vibe a bit more. So I will be checking my bits box to see what other heads I've got that I might be able to use. They all have flat necks, and the necks are incorporated on the top of the torsos there. So I will be looking through my plastics to see what else I've got, because I want to narrow down the variations in the style of heads that are here to something that looks more North African, I guess. So if we take a look at the weapon hands here, there are spears, there's a musician arm there, hand weapons, and there are some bow arms there as well. 3 different shield designs, and then the 3 legs for the riders there. And then if we look at the infantry sprue or the warriors on foot, you get 2 of these, which gives you a total of 10 miniatures. And I also think these have a real Fireforge vibe about them, particularly things like that bow arm there. I've got some of the Fireforge step warriors and step horsemen, and that is very reminiscent of that box set. And I think I've also got some Russians actually, and some of those shields look reminiscent of that. But I have to say I'm quite excited by this sprue, because I've noticed some of the head choices, and more of these heads fit with the Araby vibe that I'm after, and particularly the 2 covered heads. One of the units that I'm thinking about making will be a unit of assassins, and these 2 heads here really capture that. If we take a closer look at the heads, there's some interesting variation there. And another opportunity possibly to get the green stuff out and convert some slightly. This guy here in the center of the screen, I actually think he would benefit from having a much longer, fuller beard. So I will be probably doing a little bit of conversion on these as well. So again, we've got shield arms, we've got weapon arms, mostly spears on that side, musician arm there, and then a couple of bow arms and a sword. So we've reached the point in this unboxing and building video now where everything takes an unexpected turn. Normally when I do a video like this, I'll unbox the product, I'll look at the sprues, I'll build some sample miniatures, and then I do a scale comparison. And generally speaking, before I build the sample miniatures, I've had a go myself off camera. Now you'll probably have noticed that there are more miniatures in front of me than you get in the box, and that's because whilst I took a break from filming, I knew I'd bought some Muslim or Arab warriors from a friend who lives locally. So I had a rummage and found a bag which was essentially full of miniatures that were a rescue project. They were all glued onto multi-bases in groups of 4 or 6. Most of them had broken weapons, some of them had missing arms, and a few of them had heads that had been glued on and slightly misaligned. So I sat down and I began sorting those miniatures out. I took them off the bases, I rebased them onto 20mm slot bases so that I could use them with my old Warhammer rules. They would fit with a Dogs of War army. They have a really nice old Hammer vibe about them. And if I want to use them in Warhammer the Old World, I can just stick them into a conversion tray to get the frontage that I need. So having rescued the 25 miniatures that you can see in front of you here, I then started to build the rest of the miniatures from the sprues that were inside the box. And that's really where my trouble started. So I'm not going to build any more miniatures in front of the camera. I'm not going to put myself through the agony that I've been through with these in the last 2 days. I'm just going to talk now about some of the problems that I've had to deal with. So the first problem I encountered was that I'd misidentified 2 of the sprues that came in the box. I wrongly assumed, because the horses were all the same on each sprue and the layout was pretty much the same, that I had 4 cavalry sprues that were identical. I didn't. I had 2 cavalry sprues like this one here, which I left untouched for filming. And then as I was snipping horses off and building riders, I noticed that some of the sprues had these torsos, which come with a variety of armour. There are weapon arms that have armour on the shoulders, including some bow arms, and I'll come back to those in a minute, some throwing spears, some shields, and a selection of heads. And this is the sprue that I think I reviewed earlier in the video. I won't know without going back and taking a look, and I'm not doing that now. I then noticed that there were some subtle differences that weren't very obvious, and these were compounded by the fact that there are no instructions in the box. And we've got some different heads, including 2 very lovely heads where the headgear is a fez, and I think they're great. I won't be using them for this project, but I'm certainly going to save those for something else. But then I noticed the torsos are slightly different. Instead of armour, they're cloth, and we've got these ornate torsos here with the laces. Again, they're beautiful. And then we've got these kind of wrap-around fabric torsos and some slightly different heads. There are some bald heads with sort of ponytails or whatever that have a kind of step warrior sort of look to them. And then none of the arms on these sprues have any kind of armour on the shoulders, obviously, so they're all cloth. Various kind of bow arms and a few weapon arms, but they really are only token weapon arms. Mostly it's spears, throwing spears and things like that. So yeah, the horses were the same, so I've snipped them off this sprue. but left them on this sprue because I was going to cut these off and assemble them. So I've checked these horses. They're numbered, as I said earlier in the video, and these parts aren't interchangeable. Now, I began to realise as I put these together that there were two poses that were very similar. And from a distance, they actually look like the same horse. And that creates an air of repetition in the unit, which I find quite unsettling and disturbing to the eye. I got all my horses cut from the sprues, except this one that I was saving. And then I started to glue them together. And that's where I encountered the first significant problem. And that is these locator pegs here aren't really up to the job. So I found that these didn't actually help locate the left and right sides and keep them in place. Then I began to encounter some problems and issues with the legs. And basically the legs that you get on these horse halves here that aren't attached to the bases don't fit when you glue the bodies together. So if we take the horse that was my favourite horse first, you can already see there's a gap round the neck there. Now that isn't me being clumsy with assembling the model, and that isn't the model not going together properly either. I glued the model together, everything looked like it was fine. So I built the horses and then foolishly went off and made myself a cup of tea. And when I came back, all the horses of this design, which is number 3 and happens to be my favourite horse out of this set, they'd all split themselves open and the glue had dried with the two halves of the horse no longer in contact with each other. And you can see it's happened on that horse as well. You can just see how they've busted themselves apart. And what I found out is that when you glue the two horse halves together, this leg doesn't fit properly in that gap. Now I've got it in there now, but that leg is now under compression. What it's actually done is pushed the front part of the horse up and away from the other half. So I have now got to pick away at this cavalry rider to get him off the horse. The cavalry riders don't fit the horses properly anyway. There are gaps everywhere. And I have now got to cut those two halves apart and re-glue them. Had I have known, had I have just built one horse, I might have used some rubber bands to try and hold the thing together. But that was the first problem that I encountered. So the next problem that I encountered is with this horse here, which is horse number 2. The hoof on this front leg here overshoots the base. So it causes this side of the horse to drop, gives the horse a lean in that direction. And if you texture the base, you're going to end up with a horse whose foot has sunk into the mud or the sand. So what I need to do now is basically cut a piece of sprue that is the same depth as that base there and glue it in under that hoof to lift that to the same level as the surface of the base. And all those horses have that problem. And then if we look at this one here, which is horse number 1, we've got a back foot or a back hoof there that doesn't actually meet the top of the base. So when you glue the two halves of this horse together, you've got one half just floating kind of randomly. And if you try and glue it down to the base, you end up with this horse leaning again. Cavalry was just a real nightmare. The horses were a real nightmare to put together. Nothing fitted properly. And when you thought you'd got a good fit, things started opening up. And misaligning when your back was turned. Then when I started to assemble the models, there is basically a desperate shortage of shield arms or the firing arms for the mounted archers or mounted bowmen. And that brings me to my next criticism, if you like, of this kit. And I don't like doing this. I get no pleasure from doing this, but I am really unhappy with the way that that mounted archer looks. He looks more like he's about to burst into song rather than charge into a battle. And this comes down to the design of the bow arms and the arms that draw the bow strings. There isn't one combination of arms on any of these archers that gives you a good sense of a bow being fired in anger. And to illustrate the point very quickly, I just want to show you these Bretonian archers that I've used before in scale comparisons. And these were sculpted by the Perrys many years ago, but you can see how the bow arms are outstretched, they are straight, you know, the elbows are locked, and you get a sense, particularly on this one here, of the power needed to draw that bowstring. That straight line, that kind of opening of the chest and the stretching there, that pose contains energy and like dynamism. And even this one where the bowstring has been released, the archer is still following the path of the bow with his eyes, and these sculpts tell a wonderful story. And the pose is what you would expect. And okay, it may be a cinematic pose in that they're all firing up into the air, and there've been lots of debates as to whether or not the archers shot their longbows like that, or whether or not they were aiming more, you know, towards the oncoming enemy. But that discussion and debate aside, these miniatures here just encapsulate everything that is right about an archer, how they would stand and how they would use their weapon. Contrast to that, we have this awkwardness here with the bow arms that you get with these miniatures. And all the arms, instead of running in line with the body, so you can almost draw a line straight through this miniature from the elbow here to the hand here. With these, you've got this weird curve. You've almost got the archers pushing the bow out in front of their chests while the arm that draws the string is running across the chest. And aesthetically, it doesn't look right. And the only remedy for something like this is to cut the arm off and reposition it and use green stuff to build up the gap. And again, if we look at some of these that are armed with throwing spears, you glue them together, and there's a limit to where you can position the arm without the base of the spear snagging the rider that's ranked up next to it. So one or two of these figures look a bit weird because the spear is just held out in front of their faces. What felt like it might have been a 2 to 3 hour project when I picked the box up and decided to buy it has turned into essentially a 2-day nightmare. One advantage with the riders not fitting the horses very well is I've managed to pop this one off. And now I want to see if I can reposition these two halves. So I'm just gently using a sculpting tool to prise the model apart, and that's fallen apart quite easily as well. And there you can see what I mean there. As soon as I put that body against there, the rear leg is impacting the fit, it's in the way, and to get that to fit you have to push that rear leg, so there's some compression going on there. I'll add some more glue to this model now I've prized it open. I'll put some more glue on that as well. So I just want you to see how that tiny discrepancy with the length of the legs has given me all the problems with these horses that I've had. So having to force this together now the way I want it, and that's got that rear leg resisting. If I were to leave that now, it would probably pop apart again. That's the horse with the worst offending gap, now repositioned and drying. I want to take a look at some of the other gaps on these horses. Perhaps it's not so bad that I need to prise the model apart, but it definitely needs filling. And this also answers a question that I had on a previous video, which is, how do I fill a gap like that on a horse so that it's invisible? You can use green stuff, and if you use a lubricant like Vaseline or a emollient cream or something, or just water, you can work it and eventually get a reasonably smooth finish. But if I'm after a smooth finish and I want it quickly, I'll just use a piece of milliput on its own with no green stuff in at all, because when you work milliput, you can actually use a wet brush or a little bit of water on your sculpting tool, and that gets really good results really quickly. So I've mixed up some milliput on its own, neat, and I'm putting more putty there than I actually need. I then take a damp sculpting tool and just press the milliput into the gap. Now I'm trying to scrape away the excess putty without lifting it out of the gap that's there. I don't want to get rid of all of it. Now if I take a wet clay shaper, I can just work that putty there, work it smooth, blend it into the surface of the horse. And because milliput is water soluble, you can just use a wet clay shaper with a bit of water on it. And just really smooth that surface, really go to town on it. You can use a brush. If you don't have a clay shaper, you can use a brush with a soft bristle. And that's it. It's as simple as that. And I use milliput rather than green stuff, because green stuff has a quite a lovely sort of rubbery or plastic texture, makes this kind of thing more difficult, and it also has a tendency to not want to stick to plastic as readily as milliput will. And that's been smoothed down quite nicely, and I'm just taking an old paintbrush now, which I'll clean immediately after I've done this, but I can just run that across there and it'll pick up the excess moisture and any tiny particles of milliput that might be just hovering over bits of plastic where they're not needed. And that's it, simple as that. Okay, so now I need to fix the other problem that I've got with these models. That is the fact that this foot here overshoots the base, causing it to slip into what will be base texture that will bury itself in any sand or mud effects that I put on the base, as I said earlier. So I now need to get some sprue, cut a little bit of sprue just to make a wedge that will fit under there. Should have used clippers to snip that, but I want the straight edge here, and I want to be able to cut just a couple of millimeters, which you can't see because it's facing away from the camera. I don't want to take my fingers off. There we are. And then I just try and slide that underneath the hoof. Hopefully you can see already that that's solved the problem. There. So I just need some glue on that now. So I'm just putting some glue around the edge there. It'll seep in underneath the hoof and the base. And that should be enough. So I will do that to all 6 horses where the front hoof overshoots the base, and it takes that additional lean off the model that I described earlier. The last problem was this horse with hooves hovering in mid-air, because I've mixed some milliput to fill gaps with, I could just put some putty under there to build the ground up. I can use putty with this because there's not too much pressure under that leg. It's floating rather than pushing down. So just a little bit of putty there will help when it comes to doing the base texture. Obviously I've got gaps in the bases to fill as well, which I will be doing after I finish converting the models, but I just wanted to show you some of the ways that this problem with this horse could be remedied, and that's one of them. So the next thing I'm going to do is just tackle this issue with the angle of the arms. Carefully need to just try and amputate that arm, which I have, and it's now bounced across the ring. So I can probably get away with leaving that arm as it is, but this arm needs to be positioned more like that. So I'm just going to trim off that back edge there. And that will allow me to glue the top of that arm to the top of the shoulder and fill the underneath with green stuff or milliput. I'll put a tiny bit in there. Get some plastic glue on the top of the joint. Bring that arm into the position that I want to get a more deliberate firing pose. Then use a clean, wet scalpel blade to remove the excess putty. From the armpit, trying not to move the arm too much as well. Very delicate this. And then I can come back in with a wet sculpting tool just to do the final positioning. This is holding up quite well, so I just want to try and add that little bit of putty around the front here. So that should be okay when it dries. I shouldn't need to do any extra work on that, but I'm smoothing it now with a wet sculpting tool. And then I'm just going to double check that seam there, push it down ever so slightly there. And that is a much more deliberate firing position there. And you can see if you look at the top of the figure, it's not quite as in line with that archer, but it's a much better and more deliberate pose. So I will be doing that with all of the archers to get that kind of energy in the pose, because if you look at something like that, there's just no comparison. The other problem that I've got with these Saracens is that when you glue the heads on, they can literally only face forward. So when I cut the arm off this archer and reposition it, I'm also going to try and cut the head off and reposition that. Okay, so it's not perfect, but it's an improvement, and that's all that I was after really. So I've got the angle of this arm changed slightly. It's brought up higher. There's more of a linear structure to that pose now, which makes it look like the bow has actually been fired. And by turning the angle of the head looking in the direction of the shot, I think I've added a little bit more realism to that pose. And of course I fixed the horse as well. So once this is dry, I can get in and tidy up a little bit, just fill a few gaps and make sure that things are smooth enough. And then that figure will be ready for painting. Last fix I wanted to show you is just a really simple one where I'm just going to cut the hand off here and alter the angle of the spear. I may also cut the head off again and turn that, because you can see from this one here and this one here, which is very similar, they're not great poses. They look unrealistic, uncomfortable, and they don't look like they're engaging in warfare. So I've cut the head off first. That gives me a bit more room to get into the hand. Now, you may not be able to see this. I'm having to get my eye really low down to the cutting mat just to get the blade in there and get a cut that I can work with, which I've done. If that went wrong, I'd have to find another weapon from a bits box or something. But now I'll get some glue on that wrist there, and then I'll just try and level up the spear. And what I've noticed is the bottom of the spear is touching the horse, which gives me another point that I can glue this in. So I'm just going to be a little bit cheeky, tidy up that there, just take a little bit off that side of the spear there, just to give me a flat surface against the horse's body. That's an instinctive thing. I haven't actually measured that, it's just instinct. And I don't know if you can see, but that's perfect. So tiny bit more glue on the wrist. Now things are softening up, and a little bit of glue on that leather strap down at the bottom there. Bring the spear into contact with the leather strap and the hand into contact with the wrist. There's a slight awkwardness there that I just need to adjust. There we go. I'm now going to put glue on the neck and then decide how to angle that head. And it's just the slightest move there. I'll clear that detachment scar up before I paint, but a tiny little twist to the left there, and you've suddenly got a much more realistic cavalry figure there. I think it makes just for a much better pose. It's unfortunate that this didn't end up being the video that I intended to make, but nevertheless, I hope you found it useful. I hope those hints and tips that I've demonstrated while doing some remedial work on these Saracen warriors has been informative, if not interesting. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful. If you have, please smash that like button. Please subscribe for other videos like this and better videos than this. And if you'd like to leave a comment, please do, but please keep those comments kind and respectful. This is a channel that celebrates the love of the hobby and the love of miniatures, even when things go wrong like they have with this project. So please bear that in mind if you are leaving a comment. Thanks ever so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.